Are humans a slave species? The answer to this question would seem to be an obvious yes. But technically speaking, the answer is no. Now, regular viewers of the archive likely just formed a collective furrowed brow in response to that statement, so let us qualify the answer. It is prudent to understand that the query put forth here is not the same as are humans slaves to other humans? The question is in the context of our galaxy and universe, and not simply our singular planet. In other words, are we a slave species as compared to other potential extraterrestrial species? Indeed, stories describing the creation of man and its original purpose are prominent in many cultures of the world. In Mesopotamia, Sumerian poems that date to the beginning centuries of the second millennium BC are full of accounts about mankind's creation. A Sumerian account known today as Gilgamesh and the Netherworld assumes that the gods in the universe already exist and that once a long time ago the heavens and the earth were united, only later to be split apart. Later, humankind was created, and the gods divided up the job of managing and keeping control over heavens, earth, and the netherworld. The origins of humans are described in another early second millennium Sumerian poem, the Song of the Hoe. In this account, as in many other Sumerian stories, the god Enlil is described as the deity who separates heavens and earth and creates humankind. Humanity is formed to provide for the gods, a common theme in Mesopotamian literature. According to the Sumerian story Enki and Ninmah, the lesser gods, burdened with the toil of creating the earth, complained to Nama, the primeval mother, about their hard work. She in turn roused her son Enki, the god of wisdom, and urged him to create a substitute to free the gods from their toil. Nama then kneaded some clay, placed it in her womb, and gave birth to the first humans. Most prominently, the Babylonian creation story Enuma Elish is a theological legitimization of the rise of Marduk as the supreme god in Babylon, replacing Enlil, the former head of the pantheon. The poem itself has 1,091 lines written on 7 tablets. In it, Marduk fulfills an earlier promise to provide provisions for the junior gods if he gains victory as their supreme leader. He then creates humans from the blood of Kingu, the slain and rebellious consort of Tiamat. He does this for 2 reasons. First, in order to release the gods from their burdensome menial labors, and second, to provide a continuous source of food and drink to the temples. The composition ends by stating that this story and its message, presumably the importance of kingship to the maintenance of order, should be preserved for future generations and pondered by those who are wise and knowledgeable. It should also be used by parents and teachers to instruct so that the land may flourish and its inhabitants prosper. Most of the Western world is unfamiliar with these ancient Mesopotamian creation accounts. For a significant portion of the world's population, their understanding of the origin and purpose of humans is derived from religion, and in particular the Bible or modern science. Ironically, the account of creation in the Bible is a description of evolution that is in accord with modern science. Of course, the obvious problem arises when creationists insist that modern humans were created instantaneously by God and without evolutionary predecessors. Quote, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." End quote. This is the tale of man's creation as told in chapter 2, verse 7, of the book of Genesis, and this is what the creationists literally believe. But in the Hebrew text, the creative act is attributed to certain Elohim, a plural term that at the least should be translated as gods, not God. The original text also explains why the atom was created. Quote, for there was no Adam to till the land." End quote. These are two important hints to who had created man and why. As we previously noted, the original Mesopotamian texts relegate the creation of man to the Anunnaki. As the Atrahasis explains, it happened when the rank-and-file astronauts who had come to Earth for its gold mutinied. The back-breaking work in the gold mines in Southeast Africa had become unbearable. Enlil, their commander-in-chief, summoned the ruler of Nibiru, his father Anu, to an assembly of the great Anunnaki and demanded harsh punishment of his rebellious crew. But Anu was more understanding. "What are we accusing them of?" he asked as he heard the complaints of the mutineers. "Their work was heavy, their distress was much. Was there no other way to obtain the gold?" he wondered out loud. "Yes," said his other son Enki, the brilliant chief scientist of the Anunnaki, who was also Enlil's half-brother and rival. "It is possible to relieve the Anunnaki of the unbearable toil by having someone else take over the difficult work. Let a primitive worker be created." The idea appealed to the assembly of the great Anunnaki. The more they discussed it, the more they supported the creation of such a slave to take over the workload. But they wondered, how can you create a being intelligent enough to use tools and to follow orders? How was the creation or bringing forth of the primitive worker to be achieved? The Sumerian text has immortalized the answer given by Enki to the assembled Anunnaki, who saw in the creation of an Adamu the solution to their unbearable toil. "The creature whose name you uttered, it exists. All you have to do," he added, "is to bind upon it the image of the gods." In these words lies the key to the puzzle of man's creation, the resolution between evolution and creationism. The Anunnaki, otherwise known as the Elohim of the Bible, did not create man from nothing. The being was already here on earth and was in fact the product of evolution. All that was needed to upgrade it to the required level of ability and intelligence was to bind upon it the image of the gods, the image of the Elohim themselves. The process envisioned by Enki was to bind upon the existing creature the inner genetic makeup of the Anunnaki. In other words, to upgrade the existing archaic humans through genetic manipulation. By jumping the gun on evolution, the appearance of Homo sapiens could be accelerated. The term Adamu, which is clearly the inspiration for the biblical name Adam, and the use of the term image in the Sumerian text, which is repeated intact in the biblical text, are not the only clues to the Sumerian/Mesopotamian origin of the Genesis human creation story. In the Mesopotamian accounts, we read that the assembled Anunnaki resolved to proceed with the project and on Enki's suggestion assigned the task to Ninti, their chief medical officer. They summoned and asked the goddess, the midwife of the gods, the wise birth giver, saying, "To a creature give life, create workers. Create a primitive worker, that he may bear the yoke. Let him bear the yoke assigned by Enlil. Let the worker carry the toil of the gods." Until the Bible begins to relate the genealogy and history of Adam, a specific person, the book of Genesis refers to the newly created being as the Adam, a generic term. Not a person called Adam, but literally the earthling, for that is what Adam means, coming as it does from the same root as Adama, earth. But the term is also a play on words, specifically dam, which means blood, and reflects the manner in which the Adam was manufactured. It was fertilization in vitro, in glass tubes as depicted in this rendering on this cylinder seal. Essentially, Adam was the first test tube baby. There is reason to believe that when Enki made the surprising suggestion to create a primitive worker through genetic manipulation, he had already concluded that the feat was possible. His suggestion to call in Enki for the task was also not a spur-of-the-moment idea. Great scientist that he was, Enki was bound to have spent some of his time studying the flora and fauna of his surroundings as well as the fossils. As scientists do today, Enki, too, must have contemplated the course of evolution on Earth. As reflected in the Sumerian text, he came to the conclusion that the same seed of life that Nibiru had brought with it from its previous celestial abode had given rise to life on both planets, much earlier on Nibiru and later on Earth, once the latter had been seeded by the collision. The species that surely fascinated him the most was archaic humans, a step above the other primates, a hominid already walking erect and using sharpened stones as tools, a proto-man, but not yet a fully evolved human. And Enki must have toyed with the intriguing challenge of playing God and conducting experiments in genetic manipulation. Having reached the stage where genetic manipulation was sufficiently perfected to enable the determination of the resulting body's good or bad aspects, Enki and Ninti felt that they could master the final challenge, to mix the genes of hominids with the genes of the Anunnaki themselves. Using all the knowledge they had amassed, the two Elohim set out to manipulate and speed up the process of evolution. Modern man would have undoubtedly eventually evolved on Earth in any case, just as he had done on Nibiru, both having come from the same seed of life. But there was still a long way and a long time to go from the stage hominids were at 300,000 years ago on Earth to the level of development the Anunnaki had reached at that time. If, in the course of 4 billion years, the evolutionary process had been earlier on Nibiru just by 1% of time, evolution would have been 40 million years ahead on Nibiru compared with the course of evolution on Earth. So, did the Anunnaki jump the gun on evolution on our planet? Well, no one can say for sure how long it would have taken Homo sapiens to evolve naturally on Earth from the earlier hominids. It is safe to assume it would have taken much longer in the absence of the Anunnaki. Based on the information presented thus far, we can unequivocally conclude that humans were a slave species. But technically, that was not the query put forth. The question is, are humans a slave species? And if the answer is no, then when and how did the status of our species change? For literally hundreds of thousands of years, modern humans on Earth were the primary workforce for the Anunnaki. They proliferated all over the planet, and the vast majority of this newly upgraded species was in the service of the Nephilim. But circa 11,000 BC, a cataclysmic event brought forth a change in the status of Homo sapien. When the Deluge swept over the earth, it obliterated all the cities of the gods and buried the Eden under millions of tons of mud and silt. The Anunnaki were now required to rebuild their infrastructure, and such a mission would require things to be done differently this time around. The Deluge was a watershed, both literally and figuratively, in the affairs of both gods and men, and in the relationship between the two. The earthlings, who were fashioned to serve and work for the gods, were henceforth treated as junior partners on a devastated planet. The new relationship between men and gods was formulated, sanctified, and codified when mankind was granted its first high civilization in Mesopotamia circa 3800 BC. The momentous event followed a state visit to Earth by Anu, not just as Nibiru's ruler, but also as the head of the pantheon on Earth of the ancient gods. Another, and probably the main reason for his visit, was the establishment and affirmation of peace among the gods themselves, a live and let live arrangement dividing the lands of the old world among the two principal Anunnaki clans, that of Enlil and that of Enki, for the new post-alluvial circumstances and the new location of space facilities required a new territorial division among the gods. It was a division that was reflected in the biblical table of nations. This is in Genesis chapter 10, in which the spread of mankind emanating from the three sons of Noah was recorded by nationality and geography. Asia to the nations of Shem, Europe to the descendants of Japhet, Africa to the nation of Ham. The historical records show that the parallel division among the gods allotted the first two to the Enlilites and the third one to Enki and his sons. The connecting Sinai Peninsula, where the vital post-alluvial spaceport was located, was set aside as a neutral, sacred region. While the Bible simply listed the lands and nations according to their Noahite division, the earlier Sumerian text recorded the fact that the division was a deliberate act, the result of deliberations by the leadership of the Anunnaki. A text known as the Epic of Etana tells us that the great Anunnaki who decree the fates set exchanging their counsels regarding the earth. They created the four regions and began to set up the settlements. In the first region, the lands between the two rivers of the Euphrates and Tigris, man's first known high civilization, that of Sumer, was established. Where the pre-diluvial cities of the gods had been, cities of man arose, each with its sacred precinct where a deity resided in his or her ziggurat. In each such urban area, an EN.SI, a righteous shepherd, initially chosen as a demigod, was selected to govern the people on behalf of the gods. His main assignment was to promulgate codes of justice and morality. In the sacred precinct, a priesthood overseen by a high priest served the god and his spouse, supervised the holiday celebrations, and handled the rites of offerings, sacrifices, and prayers to the gods. Art and sculpture, music and dance, poetry and hymns, and above all, writing and record-keeping flourished in the temples and extended to the royal palace. From time to time, one of those cities was selected to serve as the land's capital. There, the ruler was king, also known as LU.GAL, or great man. Initially, and for a long time thereafter, this person, the most powerful man in the land, served as both king and high priest. He was carefully chosen for his role and authority, and all the physical symbols of kingship were deemed to have come to earth directly from heaven, from Anu on Nibiru. This aspect of kingship, as the essence of civilization, just behavior, and moral code for mankind, was explicitly expressed in the statement in the Sumerian king list that after the Deluge, kingship was brought down from heaven. It is a profound statement that must be contemplated. Circa 3100 BC, a similar, yet not identical civilization was established in the second region, in Africa, that of the river Nile, Nubia, and Egypt. Its history was not as harmonious as that among the Enlilites, for rivalry and contention continued among Enki's 6 sons, to whom not cities but whole land domains were allocated. Paramount was an ongoing conflict between Enki's firstborn, Marduk, which is also known as Ra in Egypt, and Ningizida, who was known as Thoth in Egypt, a conflict that led to the exile of Thoth and a band of African followers to the New World, where he became known as Quetzalcoatl, the winged serpent. Marduk, or Ra, himself was punished and exiled when opposing the marriage of his young brother Dumuzi to Enlil's granddaughter, Inanna. He caused his brother's death. It was a compensation to Inanna that she was granted dominion over the third region of civilization, that of the Indus Valley, circa 2900 BC. According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki established kingship, civilization and its institutions as most clearly exemplified in Mesopotamia, as a new order in their relationships with mankind, with kings/priests serving both as link and separator between gods and men. But as one looks back on that seemingly golden age in the affairs of gods and men, it becomes evident that the affairs of the gods constantly dominated and determined the affairs of men and the fate of mankind. So, even though the humans on Earth had gained some measure of independence and freedom, the course of their development remained tightly connected to the actions of the Anunnaki. This remained the case until the majority of the Anunnaki stationed on Earth had departed the planet circa 560 BC. It was during this time that most remaining Anunnaki left the planet from Nazca when Nibiru neared Earth. The majority of Anunnaki left Earth around 2,500 years ago, and there is no telling who might still be around, possibly manipulating the affairs of humans today. But at the very least, we can conclude that the current worldwide power and control infrastructure involving politics, economies, and religions is a direct result of Anunnaki intervention of human evolution in our distant past. So, the viewer may ask, doesn't that still make us a slave species? Again, the answer is no. While it is true that the status of large portions of our global population can still be characterized as one of slavery, it is the result of the actions of other members of our species, and no longer a direct extraterrestrial intervention. In other words, we can learn and think for ourselves now. And even though it may seem like no one around you can actually do either of those two things, it does not negate the very real and extant capacity for the human species to evolve forward on its own.
Look up, live free, dream big, and see the world is yours, the world is yours. Give all you have to give. The world is yours, the world is yours. I tried to break free, you tried to keep me bound. I tried to live right, you tried to keep me down. But now I'm going up, I'm moving higher than anywhere that I've been before. I'm flying, man. It's kinda crazy, like my feet are lifting off the ground. I'm touching heaven with my hands now to get the sound. But though I'm flying, my head is still level, and I won't be bound down to hear the whispers of the devil. Now the future is here, and it looks real bright, and it can be yours too if you set your path right. I know life can be hard, but you were put here to win. Just refuse to quit when you're down and get back up again. Man, I used to rap my music from my tiny bedroom, and though I dreamt of being free, I felt trapped like in a tomb. And even though the times are dark and I can barely even see through all the tears, I sit and pen, weave out my destiny. But now the days are gone where I would listen to the critics who counted me out before they ran the proper analytics. I'm here to stay, just like a necklace waiting to be pearled, and I'm throwing up the chorus as I'm singing with the world. Look up, live free, dream big, and see that the world is yours, the world is yours. Give all you have to give, 'cause the world is yours, the world is yours. You should be careful who you listen to, who watch all of the things you do. I hate to break it to you, not everyone wants the best for you. Who try to take the dream inside you, they see they're flat out jealous and envy all the things you will be. Yeah, just hold your head up, man, and keep on moving on. If I would've never struggled, then I wouldn't have this song. But don't get me wrong, no need to stack up your strife. You gotta watch the ones who you let speak straight into your life. 'Cause the artists, they will sing you all their fancy little songs with the funny little beats and all the catchy sing-alongs. But the messages they give are not the kind you should be fed. It's a recipe of lies that try to get stuck in your head. Man, I see some rappers sold the souls, I won't be selling mine. No need to find a source when you're eating from the vine. You thought that I was done, but now I'm leaving you behind. Wouldn't say I deserve it, but I'm here to get what's mine. Look up, live free, dream big, and see that the world is yours, the world is yours. Give all you have to give, 'cause the world is yours, the world is yours. Live good, live right, no fear tonight. The all you have